At 2200 hours on November 17, 1944, Sergeant Mel Grevich stood alone inside a dimly lit storage warehouse at Camp Tarawa, Hawaii, staring at a row of damaged aircraft stacked nose to tail like corpses awaiting burial. Bent wings, shattered fuselages, crates stamped scrap in fading black paint. Grevich was 26 years old. He had spent 18 months in the Pacific, and so far, he had invented nothing that had kept his men alive. That failure weighed on him heavier than the humid night air. In the previous 4 weeks of training, his battalion had lost 11 machine gunners. Not in combat. In exercises meant to prepare them for what was coming. The problem wasn't courage. It wasn't discipline. It was firepower. The Marine Corps' standard light machine gun, the M1919A6, weighed 32 pounds and fired at roughly 400 rounds per minute. It was reliable, but slow. Too slow. Grevich knew the numbers by heart. German MG, 42, 1,200 rounds per minute. Japanese Type 92, 450 rounds per minute. American M1919A6, 400. On paper, the difference looked small. On the battlefield, it was lethal. Grevich had watched machine gunners die on Bougainville because they couldn't keep enemy heads down. Japanese infantry advanced through the pauses between bursts. Each gap in fire became a doorway to death. The enemy didn't overpower Marine positions. They walked through them. Grevich belonged to G Company, 28th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division, a unit now preparing for the invasion of Iwo Jima. Intelligence estimated 21,000 Japanese defenders buried inside 11 miles of underground tunnels. The Marines would land on open, black volcanic sand with no cover, no concealment, and nowhere to hide. Machine gun teams would decide whether riflemen lived or died. And the M1919A6 wasn't good enough. 3 weeks earlier, Grevich had laid it out plainly to his company commander. The M1919A6 required 3 men to function properly. 1 gunner, 1 assistant to feed ammunition, 1 ammo bearer. If the gunner went down, the weapon went silent. If the team had to move, they had to stop firing. If they stopped firing, the enemy moved. The company commander listened carefully. Then he asked a single question. Do you have a solution? Grevich did. He had seen it once before. In November 1943, while serving with the 3rd Parachute Battalion, Marines had salvaged and /M2 aircraft machine guns from crashed SBD Dauntless dive bombers. These guns were never meant to be fired from the ground. They fired 30 caliber rounds at 1,200 rounds per minute, 3 times the rate of the M1919A6. They were lighter, faster, designed to keep firing while aircraft screamed through the sky at 300 miles per hour. On Bougainville, a Marine named Private Bill Colby had simply bolted a bipod onto one and used it as a ground weapon. It worked, but it wasn't practical. Aircraft spade grips. No stock. No real trigger. Functional, but awkward, unstable, and exhausting. Grevich and his platoon leader, Lieutenant Philip Gray, had gone further. They added an M1 Garand stock, a bar bipod, a fabricated mechanical trigger. The weapon worked beautifully. Then the Parachute Battalion was disbanded. The prototype was left behind. Now, in that warehouse in Hawaii, Grevich realized something with sudden clarity. Iwo Jima was coming, and Marines would die the same way unless something changed. He didn't need 1 gun. He needed 6. 1 for each rifle platoon in G Company, 1 for the demolition section, 1 for himself. His company commander approved the idea. The battalion commander approved it too. Quietly, unofficially, because nothing about this was authorized. The M2 was aircraft ordnance. Modifying it violated doctrine. Issuing it violated regulations. If Grevich filed paperwork, the project would vanish into bureaucracy. So he didn't. Instead, he found Private First Class John Little. Little was a machinist. A real one. He understood tolerances, metal fatigue, recoil stresses. Grevich explained the concept. Little didn't hesitate. They shook hands. Then they started stealing time. They needed 6 and /M2 receivers, Garand stocks, bar bipods, trigger components, tools, and they needed them without anyone asking questions. They began combing the base. Aircraft salvage yards, maintenance depots, repair hangars, scrap piles waiting for shipment back to the mainland. They found 3 and /M2s in a bin marked scrap. 2 more inside a damaged fuselage. The 6th from a source little later described as God knows where. By late November, they had their receivers. Every night after regular duty, they worked in a corner of the battalion maintenance shed, tools hidden, lights kept low. If they were caught, the weapons would be confiscated. Careers would end. Maybe worse. On November 21st, they began the first conversion. The M2 weighed 23 pounds with its spade grips. It had no stock, no shoulder support. It fired electrically via a solenoid. Little removed the spade grips first. Now the gun had no way to be aimed. Next came the trigger. Little bent sheet metal by hand, drilled mounting holes, fabricated a crude but functional trigger guard, and linked the mechanism to the firing solenoid. It worked. Then came the hardest part, the stock. The Garand stock had to be cut, hollowed, reshaped to accept the M2's buffer tube. Too loose, it would break. Too tight, it would split under recoil. Little worked 6 hours on that first stock. When it slid into place, Grevich exhaled for the first time that night. They added a bar bipod using a welded adapter plate, then modified M2 heavy machine gun sights to fit the receiver, then fabricated a 100-round ammunition box, allowing a single Marine to carry and fire the weapon alone. By December 5th, the first gun was finished. They took it to a remote firing range. When Grevich squeezed the trigger, the weapon came alive. The sound wasn't a burst. It was a continuous roar. The barrel climbed. The bipod bit into the dirt. Spent brass poured out like rain. The target vanished behind a wall of dust and shredded wood. The gun wasn't standard issue. It wasn't approved. But it worked. And in less than 3 months, Marines would carry it onto the black sand of Iwo Jima. They loaded a 100-round belt. Grevich shouldered the weapon, settled the bipod into the dirt, and aimed at a silhouette target 50 yards downrange. He exhaled once and pulled the trigger. The gun came alive. Not in a burst. In a violent, ripping stream. The rate of fire was unmistakable. 1,200 rounds per minute. The sound was sharper than the M1919A6, faster, more aggressive, closer to tearing fabric than cracking thunder. The stock absorbed the recoil better than Grevich expected. The bipod kept the weapon planted. The muzzle climbed, but controllably. He fired 3 10-round bursts. When the dust settled, every round had struck within an 18-inch grouping. The weapon worked. Then it failed. After 30 rounds, smoke curled from the barrel. After 50, the steel glowed too hot to touch. After 75, the gun stopped firing completely. The barrel had expanded from heat. The M2 had been designed to scream through the sky, cooled by 300-mile-per-hour airflow. On the ground, there was no cooling, no slipstream, no margin. Sustained fire overheated the barrel in under 2 minutes. For a moment, the project hung on the edge of collapse. Grevich and Little sat in the dirt beside the smoking weapon and talked it through. They couldn't add water cooling, too heavy, too complex. They couldn't change barrel thickness, no machining access. They couldn't redesign the weapon in the time they had. There was only one solution. Change how Marines fought with it. No sustained fire. No long bursts. Only short, violent bursts, 5 to 10 rounds. Then pause. Let the barrel cool. Then fire again. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. And it was still 3 times faster than anything else Marines carried. By December 20th, 3 weapons were complete. By January 5th, all 6 were finished. Each weighed 25 pounds, 7 pounds lighter than the M1919A6. Each fired at 3 times the cyclic rate. Each could be operated by 1 Marine, not 3. They painted them olive drab. Grevich named his weapon Betty, and the others received names too. Each name was stenciled in white paint directly onto the receiver. On January 7th, 1945, the 5th Marine Division boarded transport ships in Hawaii. The 6 machine guns were packed inside ordinary equipment crates. There was no paperwork, no inspection tags, no ordnance approval, no serial documentation. As far as the Marine Corps was concerned, they did not exist. Grevich carried the standard M2 maintenance manual in his pack. If anyone asked questions, he hoped it would be enough. The convoy sailed west toward the Japanese home islands, and Grevich wondered if his guns would work when it mattered, or fail and get Marines killed. The transport stopped at Eniwetok on February 5th. During equipment checks, Grevich inspected all 6 weapons. He test-fired each one at a makeshift range. All 6 functioned. The overheating problem remained, but disciplined firing, short bursts, pauses, kept the guns running. They would be effective against pillboxes. On February 13th, the division conducted its final rehearsal landing on Tinian. This time, Grevich took all 6 weapons ashore. The guns survived the surf, but the ammunition boxes didn't. Salt water corroded the metal. Sand jammed feed paths. Belts dragged grit into the receivers. Grevich and Little spent 2 days stripping, cleaning, sealing, and waterproofing everything they could. For the real assault, the weapons were wrapped in canvas tarps. On February 16th, the convoy arrived off Iwo Jima. 8 square miles of volcanic rock. Mount Suribachi rose 550 feet over the southern end of the island. Intelligence estimated 21,000 Japanese defenders, most underground. The island had been bombed for 74 consecutive days. Battleships had fired thousands of shells. Yet reconnaissance photos showed the defenses were still intact. The 28th Marines would land at Green Beach, directly below Suribachi. Their mission: cut the island in half. Isolate the mountain. Then take it. The terrain was a nightmare. Soft black sand that swallowed movement. Terraces that funneled attackers into kill zones. Interlocking bunkers covering every approach. On February 18th, Grevich assembled his fire teams. He explained the weapon again. No sustained fire. 5 to 10 rounds only. Watch the barrel. If it smokes, cease fire immediately. Each gunner would carry 200 rounds. Ammo bearers would carry spare belts. Assistant gunners would monitor heat. The weapons were distributed. 1 to 1st platoon. 1 to 2nd platoon. 1 to 3rd platoon. 1 to the demolition section. Grevich kept Betty in. There was still 1 gun left. The battalion commander suggested a name. Corporal Tony Stein. Stein belonged to a different company, same regiment. He was a machinist from Dayton, Ohio. A toolmaker. Experienced. Precise. Trusted. Grevich met him that evening. Stein examined the weapon carefully. He checked tolerances. Trigger travel. Stock fitment. Feed alignment. He asked questions only someone who understood machines would ask. Grevich answered every one. Stein nodded once. He understood. Years later, rumors would circulate that Stein had helped build the guns. Nothing was ever documented. Little never confirmed it. He only said Stein knew what he was doing. That was enough. At 0400 hours on February 19th, Marines began loading into landing craft. Naval bombardment resumed at 0640. 16-inch shells from battleships. 8-inch shells from cruisers. Destroyers firing point-blank into the terraces. The island disappeared behind smoke and dust. Grevich stood in the landing craft with 42 Marines from G Company. Betty and was wrapped in canvas. A 100-round box locked in place. 2 spare belts in his pack. Total weight, 47 pounds. A standard M1919A6 with tripod and ammo weighed 56 pounds and took 2 men to carry. His gun was lighter. Faster. Illegal. At 8:30, the assault waves formed. The bombardment lifted. The first wave hit Green Beach at 0900. No enemy fire. Marines poured out, moved inland. The beach was silent. From 800 yards offshore, Grevich watched. Something felt wrong. At 0912, his craft crossed the line of departure. Still no fire. At 0914, they were 100 yards out. Black sand. Terraces. Wrecked landing craft. No Marines visible. At 0915, the ramp dropped. Grevich was the 3rd man out. His boots hit waist-deep water. The sand gave way beneath him, and he began wading toward a beach that looked empty. Seconds before Iwo Jima revealed itself, Grevich pushed forward. 20 yards. 15. 10. At 9:16, the first mortar round landed 40 yards to his left. The explosion hurled black volcanic sand 20 feet into the air, raining down like gravel. 5 seconds later, a second round slammed into the beach 30 yards to his right. Then the island woke up. Mortars. Artillery. Machine gun fire. The Japanese had waited. They let the first 2 waves land. Let the Marines bunch up on the beach. Then opened fire from prepared, concealed positions carved into the terraces. At 9:17, Grevich reached the beach. He dropped behind a shallow rise in the sand, tore the canvas off Betty, and snapped the bipod down and scanned uphill. The fire was coming from pillboxes embedded into the terraces, concrete, reinforced, nearly invisible until they fired. Each position covered the next. Interlocking fields of fire. 20 feet to his right, a Marine team was trying to set up an M1919A6. The assistant gunner was feeding the belt. A burst of Japanese fire cut him down instantly. The primary gunner grabbed the weapon, tried to reposition, and a second burst hit him square in the chest. The M1919 collapsed into the sand. The entire fire team was gone in 8 seconds. Grevich had already found the source. A pillbox 70 yards inland. Firing slits 6 inches high, 2 feet wide. He shouldered Betty and aligned the sight on the opening and pulled the trigger. 10 rounds. 1 second. The sound was unmistakable. Sharper. Faster. Different. The M2 tore through the noise of the beach at 1,200 rounds per minute. Tracers marked every 5th round. All 10 impacts stitched the concrete around the firing port. The Japanese gun stopped. Grevich paused. 5 seconds. Let the barrel breathe. Second target. 80 yards left. Another 10-round burst. Silence. Third target. Fire. Shift. Fire. Each burst was deliberate, short enough to prevent overheating, long enough to crush resistance. The difference was immediate. An M1919A6 fired at 400 rounds per minute. A 10-round burst took 1.5 seconds. Betty and fired the same 10 rounds in half that time. Half the exposure. Half the chance for enemy gunners to track him. And the suppression was heavier. Japanese defenders couldn't return fire while 1,200 rounds per minute were hammering their positions. Across Green Beach, Grevich heard it. The higher pitch. The faster cycling. The other modified guns were firing. All 6. Spread across the beach with different platoons and sections, but unmistakable. By 9:30, elements of the 28th Marines were pushing inland. The beach was still under fire, but the volume had dropped. The modified weapons had punched gaps into the Japanese fire plan. Marines flowed through those gaps, clawing their way into the terraces. Grevich's ammo box ran dry. 100 rounds, gone in 15 minutes. He slapped in a fresh belt. The barrel was hot, not critical, but close. He shortened his bursts, increased cooling time. At 9:45, a runner reached him. Different company. Right flank. Corporal Tony Stein. Stein was engaging pillboxes directly. He had already made 3 trips back to the beach for ammunition, each time dragging a wounded Marine with him. He was running without helmet, without boots, moving faster under fire. Grevich acknowledged the report. He wondered how long the guns could hold. The barrels were thin, built for aircraft, built for airflow that didn't exist here. Iwo Jima itself radiated heat. Steam bled from cracks in the ground. Volcanic rock amplified everything. At 10 o'clock, Grevich heard something new. Not gunfire. A sound rising from the terraces, high-pitched, frantic, almost animal. Marines all along the beach would later report hearing it. Some believed it was Japanese soldiers reacting to the unfamiliar rate of fire. The sound, the sudden effectiveness. Whether they called them monster guns was never confirmed. But the psychological effect was real. And Grevich knew the weapons were doing exactly what he had built them to do. The question was how long they could keep doing it. By 11 o'clock, all 6 modified weapons were in constant use. The gunners had learned the rhythm. 5 to 10 rounds. Pause. 5 to 10 rounds. Pause. The barrels stayed alive. The advantage was obvious. A standard American machine gun needed 3 men. These needed 1. The gunner carried the weapon and the ammunition. No assistant feeder. No collapse if 1 man went down. Rifle squad stayed intact and mobile. Weight mattered too. 25 pounds, not 32. The 1st platoon gunner hit a pillbox complex northeast of Green Beach at 11:30. 3 firing ports. Interlocking coverage. He advanced to 60 yards. 15-round burst, center port. Shift left, fire. Shift right, fire. 12 seconds total. All 3 ports went silent. The platoon moved. At 12 o'clock, the 2nd platoon gunner supported a demolition team attacking a concrete bunker at the base of a terrace. Steel door. Reinforced walls. Japanese fire blocked the approach. The gunner suppressed 4 positions in sequence, short bursts, rapid transitions. The demolition team placed charges. The bunker died at 12:15. At 12:30, the 3rd platoon gunner found the limit. 90 minutes of heavy use. The barrel overheated. The weapon jammed. Cleared. Jammed again. He stopped. Let it cool for 10 minutes. It came back online. The lesson was clear. Discipline mattered. Short bursts or failure. The demolition section gunner covered engineers clearing mines and wire under fire. Suppression held. Obstacles fell. By 1300 hours, 3 major belts were gone. The 28th Marines pushed deeper inland. By 1400 hours, Grevich had fired roughly 400 rounds. The barrel showed heat discoloration near the chamber. Slight warping. Still functional. He shortened bursts to 5 rounds. Extended cooling to 20 seconds. Betty and stayed alive. On the right flank, Stein had become impossible to ignore. He identified pillboxes, closed the distance, hammered the firing ports, then rushed with grenades while defenders were pinned. It worked. It burned ammunition fast. And it was changing the fight. By 1500 hours, Tony Stein had made 8 trips back to the beach. Each run covered roughly 200 yards under fire. Each time, he returned not just with ammunition, but dragging wounded Marines who couldn't walk on their own. The psychological effect of the modified weapons was becoming visible. Japanese defenders reacted differently to them than to standard American machine guns. The rate of fire was triple what they expected. The sound was sharper, higher-pitched, relentless. Several Marines reported hearing Japanese voices during firefights, shouting, panicked, urgent. No one could confirm the words. But the reaction was unmistakable. What was confirmed was results. The 6 weapons had suppressed dozens of fortified positions. They enabled advances that had stalled under standard fire. They cracked defensive seams that heavier, slower guns could not. By 1600 hours, the 28th Marines had reached their D-Day objective. They had crossed the 800-yard neck of the island. Mount Suribachi was cut off. Isolated. The regiment had taken heavy losses, but they held ground and prepared to assault the mountain at first light. At 1630, Grevich inspected Betty Ann. The barrel was damaged. Heat stress had produced fine fractures near the chamber. The weapon still functioned, but not for long. He estimated 2 more days, maybe less. The other 5 guns showed similar wear. That night, John Little examined each weapon. His assessment was blunt. The barrels were failing faster than predicted. 48 hours of service life remained, at best. There were no replacement barrels. The M/M2 wasn't designed for field maintenance. When a barrel failed, the weapon was finished. Grevich did the math. 6 weapons. 2 days. He wondered whether that would be enough, or whether they would burn out before the real fighting even began. February 20th. Assault on Suribachi. At 6 o'clock, rain fell cold and steady. The 28th Marines prepared to assault Mount Suribachi from 3 directions. The mountain rose 550 feet of volcanic rock, riddled with caves, tunnels, firing chambers, all connected underground. Japanese artillery, machine guns, and mortars were invisible, protected, and waiting. The Marines would advance uphill across open ground with almost no cover. Grevich's fire team stepped off at 7:30. Their mission: suppress positions on the eastern slope while rifle squads moved. Betty and had cooled overnight. The barrel showed damage, but during the function check, the weapon cycled normally. Grevich loaded a fresh 100-round belt. He calculated 10 to 12 engagements before resupply. The advance was slow. Japanese fire erupted from hidden positions: mortars, machine guns, rifles. The terrain forced Marines into narrow corridors, each one covered by overlapping fire. The modified weapons became essential. Grevich identified a machine gun nest. 10-round burst. Silence. Rifle squads advanced 20 yards. Another position opened fire. Another burst. The cycle repeated: fire, move, survive. By 9 o'clock, the weapons began to fail. The first platoon gun suffered a catastrophic barrel split. The thin aircraft barrel ruptured under heat and pressure. The weapon was dead. The gunner reverted to an M1919A6. The drop in suppression was immediate. The demolition section's gun jammed when volcanic dust clogged the ammunition box. The belt seized. It took 15 minutes to clear. The weapon functioned afterward, but only with constant cleaning. At 9:30, the 3rd platoon gun overheated critically. The gunner had fired almost continuously for 40 minutes. No cooling discipline. The barrel warped. Rounds began to keyhole. Accuracy collapsed. The weapon jammed permanently. He abandoned it and took a rifle from a wounded Marine. 3 guns were gone. The last 3. Only 3 weapons remained operational. Betty and, with Grevich on the eastern slope. The 2nd platoon gun. Tony Stein's weapon on the western approach. Those 3 carried the machine gun burden for the entire regiment. The loss forced tactical changes. Rifle squads had to provide suppression with M1 Garens and bars. The advance slowed. Casualties rose. At 10 o'clock, Grevich's ammunition became critical. He had fired 600 rounds since stepping off. His final belt held 75 rounds. Resupply was impossible. The beach lay 300 yards behind the line, swept by mortar fire. Ammunition bearers couldn't move. Grevich cut his bursts to 3 rounds. Only critical targets. Only immediate threats. At 10:45, the 2nd platoon gun failed. The fabricated trigger assembly fractured. Sheet metal had reached its limit. The trigger snapped at the mount. Field repair failed. The gun was finished. Only 2 remained. Grevich on the east. Stein on the west. They couldn't coordinate. Couldn't support each other. Each was isolated. Each was low on ammunition. Each carried a weapon that could die at any moment. At 11:20, Grevich's last belt ran dry. 75 rounds, gone. He found a wounded Marine carrying standard M1919 belts. They were compatible. He loaded one, tested the trigger, Betty and fired. He had 200 rounds left. After that, dead weight. The end of Betty Ann. The assault continued through the afternoon. Every cave was a fight. Every bunker a problem. Flamethrowers. Demolitions. Tank fire. By mid-afternoon, only 2 modified weapons still worked, and both were dying. By 1700 hours, the 28th Marines had advanced 200 yards up Suribachi. They held ground halfway to the summit. Casualties stood at 430 killed or wounded in 2 days. That night, Grevich examined Betty Ann. The barrel was visibly warped. Stress cracks showed in the receiver. The trigger assembly wobbled loose. He estimated 50 rounds remained, at most. On February 21st at 8:15, Betty Ann fired its last shots. Grevich was suppressing a machine gun nest on the northern slope. He loaded his final belt, 50 rounds. 3 10-round bursts. The position went silent. He tried a 4th. Nothing. Cleared the stoppage. Pulled the trigger again. Dead. The firing solenoid had failed. Wiring shaken apart by heat and vibration. Betty Ann was finished. Grevich set the weapon aside and picked up an M1 Garand. For the next 2 days, he fought with a rifle. The machine gun he had designed, built, and carried into combat had survived 72 hours. 3 days. But in those 3 days, it had changed the fight. Tony Stein's weapon lasted longer. Stein kept firing through February 23rd, and the Marines kept moving uphill. February 23rd, 1945. That was the morning the 28th Marines reached the summit of Mount Suribachi. At 8 o'clock, a 40-man patrol from E Company began the climb. They carried a small American flag rolled around a length of pipe. The ascent was slow, cautious, contested by hidden defenders firing from caves and crevices. At 10:20, the patrol reached the summit. The flag went up. Photographers captured the moment. Later that afternoon, a second, larger flag was raised, visible across the entire island. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured that second raising. The image became one of the most recognized photographs in American history. By then, the modified weapons were dying. Tony Stein's gun failed on February 24th. The barrel fractured completely near the chamber. The weapon split apart during firing. Stein wasn't injured, but the gun was destroyed. He picked up a standard M1919A6 and continued fighting through the remainder of the Suribachi operation. By February 26th, all 6 modified weapons were finished. 4 suffered barrel failures. 1 failed from a broken trigger assembly. 1 developed a catastrophic receiver crack and was deemed unsafe. The 28th Marines gathered the wrecked guns. They were supposed to be turned in for documentation, but the weapons had never been officially registered. No serial numbers. No property books. No maintenance records. The guns vanished, discarded with other battle-damaged equipment. Buried in volcanic sand. Lost forever. No official record remains of what happened to them. Tony Stein. After Suribachi was secured, the 28th Marines moved north. The fighting intensified. Japanese defenses grew denser. Interlocking caves, spider holes, machine gun complexes that covered every approach. Progress slowed to yards per day. Casualties climbed. On March 1st, Stein volunteered to lead a 19-man patrol to destroy a machine gun position that had pinned down an entire company. At 1400 hours, the patrol advanced north of Hill 362A. They moved through shattered terrain under fire from multiple directions. Stein identified the primary gun position. He was using a standard weapon now. Slower rate of fire, less suppression. As he moved forward, a Japanese sniper fired a single round. It struck Stein in the head. He died instantly. He was 23 years old. 14 days after landing on Iwo Jima. The citation. The Medal of Honor recommendation was submitted on March 15th. The citation focused on February 19th, the first day of the invasion. It described Stein armed with a personally improvised aircraft-type weapon. It credited him with providing covering fire for his platoon, making 8 trips to the beach for ammunition, carrying wounded Marines to safety each time, killing at least 20 Japanese defenders, destroying multiple pillboxes, standing upright under fire to draw enemy attention. The citation made no mention of Mel Grevich, John Little, the 3 months of fabrication in Hawaii, the existence of 5 other weapons. The phrase personally improvised implied sole authorship. That was not true. The citation moved upward. Approved by Battalion Commander, Regimental Commander, Division Commander, Fleet Marine Force Pacific, Admiral Chester Nimitz, Chief of Naval Operations, Secretary of the Navy. President Harry Truman signed the authorization. On February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after the landing, Stein's widow received the Medal of Honor in Columbus, Ohio. The story spread nationwide. A toolmaker from Dayton. An improvised weapon. Extraordinary courage. The story was true, but incomplete. The men history forgot. 2 Marines had designed the weapon. 2 Marines had built 6 of them. Those Marines were Mel Grevich and John Little. They were never mentioned. The reason was simple. They survived. Of the 464 Medals of Honor awarded in World War II, 324 were given to men who died earning them. The story of sacrifice is powerful. It endures. Grevich survived. He fought through the entire 36-day battle. Wounded twice. Never evacuated. He returned to Hawaii in March 1945. Prepared for the invasion of Japan. Japan surrendered. Grevich was discharged in 1946. He returned to Mountain Iron, Minnesota, lived quietly, and died in the 1980s. His obituary did not mention the weapon. John Little survived as well. He fought on Iwo Jima with H Company, 28th Marines. He was at the base of Suribachi when both flags were raised. After the war, he became a home builder in California. He rarely spoke about combat. Late in life, he confirmed his role in building the weapons, but never sought recognition. He died in 2015. His obituary mentioned Iwo Jima, not the Stinger. Aftermath. The Marine Corps never adopted the design. After Iwo Jima, recommendations were made. 1 weapon per platoon. Replace the bar. Ordnance evaluators studied the concept. They found the flaw. The barrel. Aircraft barrels couldn't endure sustained ground combat. They worked briefly, and then failed. Replacement barrels would be consumed constantly. Logistics made adoption impossible. The Marines kept the M1919A6. Heavy, slow, reliable. After the war came the M60. Higher rate of fire, lighter weight, quick change barrel. Lessons learned, but the Stinger itself faded away. What remains? Decades later, historians rediscovered the story. After-action reports mention modified weapons used by the 28th Marines. They named Stein because his citation was detailed. They assumed sole authorship. It took years to uncover the truth. Interviews. Technical analysis. Who had the skills? Who had access? Who had the time? Today, 1 replica exists. Built by the Canadian Historical Arms Museum. It took 3 months in a modern machine shop. What Grevich and Little built with hand tools in 10 weeks. The replica confirmed everything. Devastating firepower, excellent control, and inevitable overheating. The original 6 weapons were never recovered. They existed for 3 months. They fought for 3 days. Then they vanished. No serial numbers. No records. No surviving examples. Only the story.